Welcome to Journey Home to Self. This is a place for you to remember who you are. Here we find the path to our true self and start living deeply authentic lives that are filled with purpose and meaning. I'm your host, Deepshikha. I'll be your guide, your partner, and a fellow traveler on this adventurous ride. And along with my guests, we bring you conversations, opinions, ideas, wisdom, and resources so you can start your journey home to self. Let's begin. My guest today is the amazing Suzanne Kingsbury. She is my writing mentor, an award-winning, best-selling author whose books have been translated widely abroad and optioned for film. She's the founder of Gateless Writing, Inc., a literary arts organization based on creative brain science and ancient Zen, offering writers a sanctuary, a worldwide network, industry know-how, and the resources they need to create writing that moves a crowd. Her writers have been repped by New York's top lit agents and have gone on to be published and reviewed by the best publishers and the biggest media outlets in the world. Her special sauce is a profound approach to the inner critic and her ability to channel into her writers' creative genius to help them reach the highest vision of where they want to go in the world. Suzanne, I'm so excited. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Deepshikha. You are one of my favorite people, so it's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today.
I am so glad you feel that way about me because I feel the same about you. And I want the world to know about Gateless. Your Gateless and your mentorship and your teaching has literally changed the way I approach my writing and the way that I write. So I'm curious, starting from the top, how did Gateless came to be?
It's interesting because I was never wanting to be a writer. I was always journaling and sort of writing these secret stories. I had a pretty hard childhood, and that was one of the ways that I would be able to escape or find sanctuary was on the page, but I never thought about it as a vocation.
Wow.
And when I got my first astrological read, she said, "You have the finger of God in your chart." I was maybe 22, and it's all about writing. And
Hmm.
I was a dancer at the time, and I said, "Couldn't it be about maybe choreography?" And she said, slight possibility, but really everything in your chart points to the fact that you are here to work with the written word. And after that, I gave myself to it in a way that I never had before. I don't think she knew that she was catalytic, and I don't even think I knew that that was catalytic, but it was a way for me to surrender to something that I had done all my life. And Gateless started because I got a writer's block.
Okay.
I mean, I think we all get into blocks, right? And it's what gets us out that's often the door to the next thing. You're
Uh-huh.
desperate and you're trying to figure out how to get unstuck. And then it's the research that you do or the people that you meet while you're working on getting unstuck that's actually working on you in the way that the stuckness was trying to show you, it's trying to show you a door, and that's how we find the door. So I began researching creative brain science, really what is our brain doing when it's stuck? And
Hmm.
it was very interesting to find that the way to get unstuck was not to look at what was the matter with your work or your life or your relationship, but look at what was working and what had power and what had strength. And you might need resources. You might need, for example, if you're stuck in your writing, you might need craft tools, but you definitely don't need criticism when you're stuck, and you don't need judgment. And if you go further, in fact, when we're in criticism and judgment, the creative brain shuts down. And I found that fascinating because our world is made of criticism.
Hmm.
Any arena in our world, and there's critical thought and this cult like understanding that without criticism, we can't be good at what we're doing. And it is the opposite of what the neuroscientists have discovered, and nobody's really listening. You know what I mean? Because we're so used to believing that criticism is important. So Gateless started because I realized that I could help other writers become the highest vision of who they wanted to be in their lives and on the page if I could pass them craft, a network, resources, agent names, and then just work with the work in terms of like, what are you doing well? Where's your power on the page? What are your strengths? How can we find your voice and move with it? How can we make this work even more of what it is and just leave the criticism behind? And then Gateless started because it worked really well. So a lot of people were getting book deals, they were getting media attention, they were moving in their lives, they were moving to the place they've always wanted to move, or they were breaking up with somebody and finding new love, or they were, it went way past the page. So I think that's why it's become such a big movement.
Yeah, and it is a movement. And wow, like as you were speaking, I was having like a physical body reaction. My heart was like opening up even more because it is true, right? When we only find what's not working, and I think that's the world that we live in. The first question that we ask when things are not working in our life, whether it's on the page or off the page, what's wrong with me? Like what did I do wrong? And when we start to look at what is working, that's when it's almost like the creative part of our brain switches on, and we have all the answers that we need. It goes beyond even writing, which is why I love Gateless.
Yeah, well, it's interesting too with the body. I had a very, very bad experience with Lyme disease, and it wound up being that I was living in a big loft with black mold in it, and I didn't know it. So I was trying to navigate this Lyme disease that was so bad, and it wouldn't go away and wouldn't go away. What I didn't know that I was also fighting was the black mold. So one night I was lying in bed. I always had insomnia because I was in so much pain. And I was thinking about all the places that I hurt. Oh my God, my ribs. It was a weird pain. It was like in weird places. And I was sort of contemplating that. And then all of a sudden I realized there's so much of my body that doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, my toes don't hurt right now. My eyelids don't hurt. My ears don't hurt. And I started doing that every night. And every time I thought of it, I would do that. And my body started to respond. And I started to feel stronger and stronger and stronger. It was fascinating that it works within the somatic as well.
For sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's so beautiful, and goes to show that this goes beyond our creative abilities or creative talents. Um, I I've told you this story personally, but I want to share this on the podcast as well. My writing, of course, has been impacted so much by Gateless because I can see what's working and my brain creates more of that. But not only that, then my internal editor comes online and tells me that, oh, I think you can do better here. And not from a critical place, from a very loving place. It's like my higher self is now on board. We are all in a meeting together and we are creating a solution, or we are creating this beautiful writing. But I want to tell you the impact that my kids have had because of Gateless. I think I've shared this with you before. So both my kids love reading. They've got this from their mom, and they also both love writing when they get to it. And in school, they have to do some writing. And once my son came home with a piece of writing that he'd written a story, and he created a book, like a comic book, and he had stapled the pages and all of that, and he gave it to me for me to read. And then what they both love to do is for me to like turn on the back and then give them 5 stars and give them a review. So I gave them that, but there was very little space. But I sat him down and I said, I really want to tell you what I absolutely love about this piece, about this book. And I told him a few things that I loved, and he was doing really well. And I could see his face just light up. It was so beautiful to see. And his first reaction was, oh, I know what to do next. I'm going to go work on my next book, or I'm going to work on my next story. So I just feel that The critic, which I would love to get into detail with you here, it shuts down completely when we are not pointing out what is not working, which is not how the world works, right?
No.
Even the writing salons, and I've been to a few that were not gateless. They're meant to point out what's not working in the work, in the sense to make you feel that, oh, this should help you improve.
Yeah. And the fixing, right? We need to fix this work. We need to cut this work. All of these words, if you look at the inverse of those words, what do you want to keep? What do
Yeah.
you want to build? So it isn't about not making the work better, right? As you know, gateless writers are extremely successful. I mean, they're on worldwide stages, they're getting huge literary awards, they're doing very well in the world. But because they're not getting criticized, it's happening very quickly that they're reaching that point. And they're doing it with this kind of bliss rather than this angst. It's
Right.
almost like if you're constantly being criticized for what you're doing, quote unquote, wrong, and we can talk about how that word doesn't really work, then you're fighting against that current because what the mind focuses on, it grows. So if you're telling somebody what's not working,
Mhm.
that's what's going to grow in the piece. You're gonna constantly be paying attention to that instead of turning towards what you're doing well and building it. Now, this doesn't mean that we don't have craft tools. Like when I was really sick, it didn't mean that I stopped taking all of my medicines and all of the modalities that I was doing that were also helping. You need the resources,
Mhm.
but you just don't need to focus on what's not working in the piece. But you do need a network. You need people around you who are saying, hey, I'm in the same industry, let me help you with that. You need somebody to explain, as you're saying, oh, you don't like your dialogue, well, here's some tools for your dialogue. This is why you might know that there's something a little off about the dialogue, but here's some tools to make it better. And then you do it and then you're done. And it's like, how do we do an ending of a chapter so people keep turning the pages? Oh, here are some tools that you can do the endings like this. And you have like 5 or 7 tools and you pick 1 or 2 and then your endings are really good. So it's skipping the criticism for the craft and the resources and the tools and the support and the network and all of that.
Yeah, yeah, because that's basically what you need. You need the tools and you need to be able to believe in yourself that you're good at this and you can do this. And I think Gateless definitely brings that. Talking about the criticism, of course, there's one criticism which is external, and Gateless really gives us the community to be able to be in a place. I remember when I was in the Gateless Academy, which I urge people who are interested in writing, check it out. It's one of the most beautiful communities with resources that you can get. When I was in the Gateless Academy, one of the things that you repeatedly mentioned was don't show your work to other people outside of the community here. And I really took that seriously. I did not read my work to even some of my best friends because I know they mean well, but I know that they also don't perhaps know the place that I'm coming from, or perhaps they don't know the craft. They're readers, but perhaps they're not well equipped with the resources that they themselves might or might not have. And I think that gave me the confidence because not only was I eliminating the outside critic, but I was also building the inner confidence and wanted to eliminate or quieten at least the internal critic. And I think that's where a lot of people get stuck with the inner critic, not just with writing. I was thinking about, this topic, a conversation, because I was going to have this conversation with you today. And I believe that our inner critic is the loudest when the stakes are high.
Absolutely, that's exactly right. Because the inner critic, which we'll talk about how it's really not an inner critic,
Mm-hmm.
it's internalized from external sources. But the inner critic gets very loud when you're about to change. So if you're a domain changer, if you're a big thinker, if you're doing a book that's really going to get some attention, your inner critic will start to get super, super loud because it doesn't want you to change. its whole agenda is about stasis and keeping you safe. So if it knows, even if you're going to be on a world stage and you're going to be a best-selling author and everything is going to come to you because of this book, the critic will be like, no. I mean, it will shout and scream about exposure and how you're not good enough and you're not young enough and you're not pretty enough and the things the critic says, it'll pull out all stops. So you really know that you've got something amazing if your inner critic is making you feel crazy.
Yeah. A couple of things that I've heard you say about the inner critic is that the inner critic is the voice of the
Oppressor.
Oppressor. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
Oppressor. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a great point to bring in, and also maybe the most surprising for people is that there's an overarching culture that's at work that's keeping us all in a herd, right? You know it when you're a little girl, right? And they say, get in line. And that's essentially a microcosm of the entire world. These are the rules, stay in line. You know, we do this, we go to school these years, we get married, we have these 2 kids, we raise them like this, and we all do it over again. So anything that brings us out of that herd or out of that quote unquote belonging is going to get a slap on the wrist when we're younger. It's also a warning of danger, you know, that it might be something that you get yelled at because you touched the hot stove or you ran across the street without waiting for traffic to stop. So we begin to conflate these things in our mind. You know, they begin to sort of merge in your mind of this is dangerous and this is actually just them wanting you to fit in. It's all the same reaction.
Yeah.
So the rat in the cage is getting shocked, whether it's trying to do something amazing out of the herd or if it's doing something that is going to hurt it. And because those two things get merged in the mind, we don't know the difference anymore. So when we're doing something that's going to set us apart, which is really great writing, you know, it's a risk, it's a real risk that you have to take on the page in order to write a book that nobody's ever written before, or to tell the stories that you need to tell in order to be impactful or whatever. But it conflates in the reptilian mind as dangerous and unsafe. So because we live in such a herding culture and they quote unquote want us to be kind of like everyone else, therein lies the problem with the creative artist. And this is why so many people take creative U-turns. It's like, I don't think I'm going to do that. Not because I don't want to do the work, but because I can't deal with the voice of the critic. It's too loud.
Yeah, and it feels too dangerous. It actually is an actual threat. There's an interesting research that I'm reminded of when you were talking about the cats in the cage that they did to mice. They introduced mice to the smell of cherry blossoms and then introduced an electric shock. And they kept doing it over a period of time. And after some time, they would just introduce them to the smell of cherry blossoms and they would contract in fear as if they were about to be shocked. So it might not even be a real danger to us anymore, but because we have learned that to stay in line, to be in herd, or we've probably learned that we're not good enough, or we're not good at math, or we're not good at writing or arts or whatever, even the thought creates that same reaction.
That's right. If we've at all gotten criticized for jumping out of the herd, or we did something, you know, weird or whatever on our drawing class and we got laughed at in front of the class, any of those, even the subtlest criticism can form the inner critic. So as you can see while we're talking, that the inner critic is actually outer voices that we've internalized into belief systems. That's what the inner critic is. So we're not actually born with the inner critic. The inner critic is something that comes from socialization. And when we're socialized in it, we have to then be deconditioned. We have to be unsocialized. So if you look at people who have been in cults, right, they kind of have to unspool the mind. And we are in a cult of criticism in this culture. So your son is young enough that he didn't say to you, I don't believe you. You're just my mom. You have to say those things.
Mm.
He hasn't been conditioned towards criticism yet by the overarching culture enough that he is interrupted in that step that he's taking now, which is like, I want to write another book. And when people come to Gateless, if they've been in corporate, if they've been in athletics, if they've been in the medical industry or health, or, any of these industries, writing definitely, any of these industries that have a lot of criticism, their mind has to unspool. So we had a woman in the academy last year, and it took her months where she didn't believe that this could work. Months. She didn't drop out of the academy. She stuck with it, which was fascinating, but she kept saying to me, I don't believe this. I don't believe I can get better. I need to know what's wrong with my work. What's the matter with it? And then suddenly her mind let go of it. She did come to enough academy gateless salons, like all the showcases, all the luminaries, and she began to unspool, the mind began to unspool itself, even though her critic was still very loud. And by the end, it was almost like she was in a revival tent or something. She was like, I get it. I'm flying. My work's so much better. I understand. But it's completely normal to feel that. How could I get better? And I had someone on a call the other day say to me, I know what I'm doing well. I just don't know what I'm doing badly. There's no such thing.
Yeah.
If you know what you're doing well in your work, you would have no problem editing your work.
Yeah.
It's
Oh my
like
God,
it's
that is such a light bulb moment. Yeah, yeah. And as you're saying, I can totally see myself in the past few years that I know that I do this well. I just want to know what's wrong with me. I just want to know so that I can fix it. And when I stop focusing on that, I I already know what I need to be able to edit. I wouldn't even use the word fix, but edit or change. Wow, it's
that's great. Yeah, it's wild. And I hope we can speak plainly here about the overarching culture
of
and
course.
that the culture was made for and by the white man. So they don't have that big inner critic because they walk into a world that was made for them and
Mhm.
by them. Everything's recognizable. They're automatically accepted. There's a much different experience with a privileged white male than there would be with, say, a woman of color or somebody who has to be in a wheelchair all their lives, or they are outside of the herd already. This herd that we've made that is very, very narrow. It's a very narrow corridor. So the minute you even step a little toe out of there, it's like, don't do that. You'll never survive. You'll never be successful. You're never. So this is a process of unassimilation because the best art is not the art that stays in that corridor. The best speeches are not the ones that stay in that corridor. The best retreat leaders, the best athletes, the best medical practitioners do not stay in that corridor. They blow open their own mind and they go into the imaginal. They go into what long-term memory means. They go into self-reflection, all these things that have not naturally been in that single line that we're told to get in. So that's something to keep in mind. The more marginalized you've been within this culture, the bigger the inner critic and the stronger you're going to get because you have to get strong to expand out of that construct, to tell yourself it's okay. And that's what's so exciting about working with artists who aren't necessarily privileged white men. They have such strength and such grit, and they have been witness to this culture for so long that they have a wisdom that almost no one else has. So it's getting those voices in the room and raising them up. And you'll see that when you're at retreat, like, whoa, look at that voice. It's like very, very powerful in terms of how long it's been gestating and how rich it is now that it's out of that corridor.
Oof. Oh, thank you so much for saying that. I really want to say that because I don't think I've ever had anyone on the podcast who has called that out so plainly as it is. And being a woman of color, I know that my white peers have been able to do things that I it takes a lot, like double or triple the courage. Even like restart, we had a big hiatus on this podcast, restarting this podcast because we had that the longer the gap went, the higher my inner critic's voice went. And even doing that, everybody would be like, it's just like, just start it, like just record it. And my inner critic was like, no, you just cannot start it. So thank you for calling that out, because yes, it is true. It is harder. It is, the more marginalized you are, the louder the inner critic gets.
Yes.
I want to take a moment here because my heartbeat is so high over there. Yeah, thanks so much for that. So let's talk about how can we start to manage this inner critic. I First of all, I want to ask you, Suzanne, do you think, because I do see this messaging all around the internet these days, which is master your inner critic, or quieten the inner critic, or death to the inner critic. Do you think it ever dies?
No, I don't. And there's no death to the inner critic unless we lived on a planet where what we're talking about did not exist.
Yeah.
So think of it this way. If you are consistently becoming exposed to a certain germ that you can't get immunity from because you're getting exposed to it over and over and over again, how you have to come back and do practices. You have to remember that you're inside of this. There's all these ways that we'll talk about that you're never going to get rid of it, but you can relate and create in a way that it doesn't affect you, and actually that you can leverage it to be even bigger and even better. So let's talk about that, because otherwise it's just like, okay, what do? I live in this, I live in this patriarchy. And oh, well, the very first thing, Deepshikha, is radical nurturing of the self. So, for example, I referenced my childhood that was difficult. I had trauma in my childhood. And I have to remember that I'm going to work a little harder than the person who might have been told throughout their childhood, look, you can do this. We'll support you, whatever you do. We'll help you find the apartment in New York. We'll help you pay for it so that you can be amongst these writers. Anytime you have a problem, you can come home and stay here. It's safe. That's very different than a writer who is poverty level, has to live with 5 roommates in a tiny basement apartment in who knows where in Brooklyn. Do you know what I mean? And has to work 2 jobs in order to make that work, and fits their writing into these small little spaces at 4:30 in the morning. Very, very different. So that person does not want to start comparing themselves to someone who has the Park Avenue, but they do want to begin to give themselves radical nurturing and to realize the strength of their situation. Wow, I am getting strong. I can do anything if I can do this. I must really love writing. And that bodes so well for my career because I'm getting up at 4:30 in the morning. It's being gateless with the self first, and not thinking that that other person has any more true advantage. They have privilege, but they don't actually have advantage. You have the advantage because you know the inside of something that they'll never know. They'll never have to know it. And your writing's going to be richer because of it. You're going to be a stronger writer because you're going to know how to work hard. There are so many ways that you can radical nurture the self when the comparison begins. And often the critic begins with a comparison. I'm not as good as, I'm not as young as, I'm not as smart as, I'm not as educated as, that kind of phrasing goes around in the person's mind. So what are you good at? What have you done today that you feel really proud of? For someone who's post-trauma, getting out of bed is amazing. Brushing your teeth, good job. You took a little 10-minute walk around the block when you needed a breather. Holy moly, that's fantastic. So it's really starting and noticing when the critic comes in with that radical nurturing and asking the self, why am I missing this skill?
Yeah.
What in my past created a situation where I don't know how to talk to myself in a radically nurturing way. And then you do the investigative work on the page. The page is always really good because you get it out of the body, it's manifested in writing, and you can kind of work with it. So that's one of the main things, is the radical nurturing of the self.
Yeah. And this isn't self care. This isn't like a bubble bath. That's so different. And not that I have anything against self care, but this is really nurturing yourself like you would a child.
It's exactly right. You're nurturing the self. You're looking at the self in a way that you wish somebody else would look at you, and investigate your life for all the ways that you're being strong and amazing and powerful in your life. And you don't want to go easy on the self. That isn't the point of it.
Hmm.
The point is to investigate it with a different kind of eye. The critic has enough screen time. So let's give this gateless eye a little screen time. What are you doing well? One thing you did well today that you feel proud of. Oh, I spoke really nicely to my son, and I put that drawing on the refrigerator and I looked him in the eye. Amazing. Who has time to look their kids in the eye? Like, not very many people. So it's those kind of really investigative, being curious about your life and what you're doing well.
Yeah. Yeah, my yoga teacher calls it notice what you notice. Like don't critique it, but just notice what's happening there. I have a very interesting story to share with you here. So back when I was in the writing academy, there was a point where my critic was so loud and it didn't create a block. I was getting ideas, but it kind of created a resistance. Like I had so much resistance to sitting down and writing. And one of the things you suggested was talk to the critic. Just go and have a conversation. It might seem really silly and you might have a difficult time wrapping your head around it, but literally that's what I did. I went to the page and I just talked to it. What is it? Like what is it that you want, or what's why is the resistance there? I don't even know what I asked, but it was a long process. And what I discovered in the end was that there was a story that was coming up. It was coming to the surface. But my critic was like, you cannot write it. This story cannot go in the book because if it does, and the critic is dramatic, in the end, you will be nobody will believe you. You'll be outcast. You'll die alone. Basically, that's what the critic said. And I had to, on the page, promise the critic that this story will not go in the book, but you gotta let me write it. And a couple of times it was a lot of back and forth. And when I did it, it was like the floodgates opened up. After that, I couldn't stop writing. I don't even think after that what I wrote was coming from me. It was coming from some higher consciousness because I was writing poems, I was writing all sorts of things. It was magical.
It was magical. I saw that in your work, and it blew out the windows, blew out the doors, blew off the roof. I mean, and even in this last retreat that you came on, that voice, Deepshikha, is so powerful. And what's amazing is the critic is holographic. You could stick a finger in it. It's just all the stuff that you've ever heard. It's not real. There's nothing solid about it. It's not made of matter. It just sounds real, and it imitates all these other voices that you've ever heard. And it knows the vulnerable spots because the vulnerable spots are made from when we've gotten hit or slapped on the wrist proverbially. So we're dealing with something that's holographic. So sure, promise it anything.
Hmm.
Promise anything. You're not promising a person something. You're promising these integrated voices in the psyche something. And they will dissipate. They're mutable. They'll change. They'll lie down and sleep for a while because you're reaching fame or you're having a blast or you did what they were so afraid of and nothing happened. And also, you're challenging them in a way.
Hmm.
Watch, let me just do this and let's just see what happens. Because what could really happen? And then you do it and nothing happens and those voices go silent because they're yours. You've integrated them.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And then when your work started to blow out the doors like it did, I mean, that's what the resistance is. It is frightening. It's terrified. Because if our culture isn't letting us say things, and blow out the doors and speak truth. And every time we see people speak truth to power, then they're dead the next day. Well, of course. And in some ways, the fear is supposed to be seen so that we can see the macro of that fear as a mirror in the overarching culture. It's not a lie. It's just that we will die if we don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't know if we'll die if we'll do it.
Yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I
yeah.
mean? So we might as well do it because the soul death is so great and so powerful. It's like, do we really want to live without really living? Do we want to live under the roof or the thumb of these voices that we amalgamated to try to keep ourselves safe? No, we don't want to live there. We don't want to live in this. It's boring. It's very beige colored and mundane.
Yeah. And what you said that the critic is holographic, that is so brilliant, Suzanne, because for me, and I hope listeners can see that as well, for me, it immediately creates a separation between me and the critic. It's not me, it's not my voice.
It isn't. No, no, no. The psyche creates it to try to keep you safe, but you could put a finger through it. And if you really write out what the critic is saying, the first time I ever wrote out what the critic was saying, I had been in a salon, I had read aloud, which I don't usually do because I'm leading the salon, and I had a shame attack. So
Mm.
I wrote out the critic. Well, what is this shame attack? What is it actually saying? I'm curious. And I started to write, and I just wrote and wrote, and page after page after page until it started to contradict itself.
Mm.
And you know that it's the critic when it begins to contradict itself because it'll say things like, you don't get enough rest. You're exhausted. You work too hard. You should be accomplishing more in a day. You're not doing enough. Look at so and so. She has so much done already in her life. And it's like, whoa, whoa, hey, you just contradicted yourself.
Yeah.
And that happens over and over again. And then you begin the creative self, which is something, the I am, starts to rise up and say, well, that's not true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's true mastery. Not mastery over the critic, but with the I am. It's integrated mastery with I am not that.
Right.
And
Right.
so the next question, who am I? And that's what the writing reveals, right?
That's what the writing reveals. That's what the journey itself reveals, right? Who am
Yeah,
I if I'm not that? And that's the juice.
that
I
is.
think that the biggest battle is when you identify what all you are not. And
Yes.
then the truth starts to show itself, like it's like the clouds part and you are revealed that this is who you are.
Yes. And I think the scariest thing is, what if I'm no one? What if that is actually who I am?
Yeah.
So if you've had anyone tell you ever, don't stand up, don't be your own person, don't do that, we don't like that, we don't like it when you dance like that, sing like that, talk like that, laugh like that, then we begin to think, well, I must be this, I can't be that, so I'll just be this. And that's when people start to integrate with their inner critic instead of integrating with the I am that we came here to be.
Yeah.
And the thing that's so beautiful, Deepshikha, is no one ever realized that they were nobody
Yeah.
because we came here to be somebody.
Mhm.
There's no one like you in the whole world, and there never will be, and there never was before. You are your own spark. You have your own voice. You are multidimensional. We have no idea what's in there. But if we keep merging with the critic, we'll never know. And when the I am rises, it's magnificent, just like yours is.
Yeah. Yeah. Because when it's almost merged with the critic, it's like it's so many different voices. It's difficult to see who you are. It's difficult to really look at who you are, remember who you are.
And it's unoriginal. That's the problem with the critic. If you look at 17 different critic exercises, and by that I mean writing out what the critic is trying to say to you in the second person, like, you, Deepshikha, are doing this and you're doing that wrong, we think you should do this and all that. If you look at 17 of those, Every single one of them will be the same, pretty much. The
Yeah.
critic doesn't say anything different. It says the same things over and over and over and over again. You're too
Yeah.
old. You're not old enough. You're not pretty enough. You're smart enough. You didn't go to the right schools. You don't know the right people. This will never work. I mean, it's just like, it's so boring, really. And then the I am is never boring. No matter what, it's never boring. It's like, oh, wow, I'm thrilled by that. And that's why people who show up in not false authenticity, but their true authenticity, their weirdness, their, you know what I mean? They're just all over the place who they are. That's why we love them. That's why
Yeah.
we love them.
And most of the times it's not even what they're saying. It's who they're being. It's
That's
the
it.
it like you can look at them and you can say, oh my goodness, I don't know exactly what I love about that person or what they're doing, but I know that there's something that is really magnetic over there.
True, true. Something true over there. Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah. So then I want to ask you, is there ever a reason why someone would need the critic?
The critic is necessary. The critic is necessary because it helps us expand. So if you look at the whole universe,
Mm-hmm.
you'll find that we're in a constant state of contraction and expansion. That's how we stay in balance. It's a very delicate balance, in fact, which I think we're realizing the more we know about science. So you're always going to have a critic. It's
Mm-hmm.
always going to come up and tell you, no, you can't do this. Good. That means you have a big idea. That means your I am is starting to really show itself. And then you write it out and you have this conversation with it in order to find out what's behind it. Because the critic is a guard at the door. That's what we've talked about. It's just guarding a door. It's pacing back and forth, wearing a uniform, and it's guarding this very rich part of the self. So you have a conversation with the guard at the door. Tell me what you think, why you think I shouldn't go in that room. Well, you're too old, you're too, you're whatever that it always says. And then you poke holes in it, you kind of make fun of it, and like, that's not true, buddy. I'm not too old. Look at so and so. She did it at 80. You just start to sort of have this banter with it on the page. And then after a while, the self in the room will start to rise because the guard at the door is busy. It's talking to you, it's trying to defend itself, it's making all these contradictions. But the you that wants to come out of that door that's gotten so loud, that part of you, that rich, creative, juicy part of you, will finally just open the door because the guard's busy, and it will come out. And that's when the integration happens with the self. That this process makes the self much bigger. And the guard will be like, all right, well, she's out now. Like, not gonna drag her back or whatever. It's happened and nothing really bad happened. So that's what you felt when your writing got big. The guard at the door then kind of, and then there'll be other doors in the self that are
Right.
civilized and socialized to be with the herd. And they have rich gestational power that you're gonna do business with their guard at the door. And then they're gonna wake up and come out. So it's the rich part of the self that's knock, 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 knocking. And the guard's getting very, very angry and very big because it doesn't want to let it out because it's been told not to let it out.
Right.
So
It's
that's
a job.
it's
That's
its job. It's its job. And it's exciting because that's what we do. We actualize and individuate. Now, could our world be ordered in a different way that there wasn't an amalgamation of these critical voices? I don't know because I've never lived in one.
right.
I don't know what that would look like. I'd be fascinated to do an imaginal exercise on it. But right now we have the critic and we can work with it and we can make it work for us by letting that door swing open. But you can't tie up the guard and let it out. That it just doesn't work. The guard's going to spring forth and break all those bounds. You got to talk to it. You got to figure out what it's actually saying so that
Yeah.
you know that it's holographic and you're not afraid of that door opening.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was reminded of the book Conversations with God, by shit, I'm so bad at remembering the author's name. Neil something something.
Conversations. Yeah, I remember that book. I can't remember the author either.
Yeah, and this has been my experience too, that when you, for example, let's talk about love and a heartbreak. You really experience the love and truly hold it dear when after you've gone through a heartbreak. It's like the law of opposites, right? And the book talks about it. The God is saying that I created both. I created the polarity. I created both experience so that you could value the other experience over the other. And I feel that way about the critic because when the critic is there, the richness of the self is even more rich when you've learned to work with the critic. So I don't know if a world where there's no critic would be better off. I don't know if probably we'll get a little too lazy if there was no critic. I think the critic also makes us ask all these beautiful questions that you would not ask if the critic wasn't there. I don't know. I'm just verbal processing at this point.
I think it's interesting to think about. I think there could be a world where we were civilized without judging each other.
Yes, for sure.
But because we have a part of our psyche that is hell bent on survival, we have to. So if we didn't have that, we would just lie down and die. You know what I mean? It's like, oh well, why be here? I don't need to survive. We have this part of ourselves that gets very hell bent on survival. And that's the part that wants to survive with the herd because it's more insulated if you're with the herd and you know what you're getting with the herd. You've seen what they do ahead of you and you know where you're going and all of that. So could it be that we had a civilized society that was better able to want to survive and be involved in freedom of choice without greed, without, I don't know how that would happen. I'd be fascinated to, have you ever read The Kin of Atta Are Waiting for You?
No, I haven't. Tell me more.
That's a utopian
Mhm.
fantasy adult. It's one of the most beautiful, it's really a divine feminine text and
Mhm.
it's classic. And it is about that. What would this look like? And
Yeah.
what happens is she goes into one of the main characters in the book goes back to Earth and works as like a maid.
Mhm.
And Earth is just such a harsh realm. It's not that other realm that's kind of everyone is at their free choice and everyone lets everyone else be liberated. There's no jealousy, there's no comparison, there's no greed. Everybody partakes what they quote unquote should. And maybe there were times that we don't know about that were like that, or realms that are like that we haven't explored, in our subconscious or fantasal life. But right now we have the critic, and so we work with it and
Yeah.
we get excited because good. I'm glad my inner critic is getting so freaking loud because I know that I'm about to enter a rich room in the self that's been gestating for a very long time. And things that gestate for a long time, as you know, after having children, are beautiful and amazing and alive and bring you so much joy. So, so we work with it.
We work with it and we let the rich self take us in those rooms that we haven't been. Oh, beautiful. This was such a fantastic and a fascinating conversation, Suzanne. I absolutely loved your approach to inner critic. I learned so much today. I feel like this has been like one of my personal private mentorship lesson on inner critic. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh my God, you are so good at this, Deepshikha. It's amazing to watch you in action. You have such deep inquiry and you're so easy to go into these big landscapes with. So thank you so much for having me, love.
My pleasure. Suzanne, can you tell our listeners where they can find more about you and your work?
Yes, you can come to gatelesswriting.com or you can come to suzannekingsbury.org. Either of those will open the door to my website. And we are just starting the Gateless Academy now. So if people are building books, they should get in touch soon. It's
And
starting.
do you also have a retreat coming up? I just saw something today.
Yes,
Can you tell us about it?
we have an incredible retreat in Costa Rica coming up where we're doing Emily Pereira and I are leading a gateless shamanic retreat, which means there'll be a lot of embodiment practices. There'll be amazing food as well as yoga, sound healing. I'm doing a lot of shamanic calling in and channeling, and we'll do gateless writing, a lot of gateless writing. So anybody who wants to come, there are a few spots still left. It's December 3rd through the 8th in Santa Teresa, Costa Rica, which is a sacred land. It's just absolutely paradise.
Oh, beautiful. And I went to my first Gateless retreat in September, right? Oh, wow. I feel like I have two different lives. One was before the retreat and one was after. So I don't even think I can put the experience in words. It was such a beautiful opening up of everything. And the writing that you do is amazing, but the connections that you make, the writing that you hear is just out of this world. It's impacted me deeply. And yeah, if anyone is thinking of going to a retreat, and you don't have to be a writer to go on the retreat.
No, you definitely, especially for the Sunrise Mountain Retreat, it's so many different modalities. What it really is to take us out of the quotidian life and radically nurture the participant so that they can feel again what it's like to be liberated in their true self and actualized. And it's just, people come away from there and their lives are changed. Emily Pereira, who runs the Sunrise Mountain Retreat, is an amazing retreat leader and really knows that land and is able to, I mean, get us sort of experiences that you could never have if you were just kind of traveling around.
Yeah. It's definitely a raising of the consciousness. And if you, this is what I'll say about the retreat. If there was a fast track way to work with your inner critic and go into the rich rooms of self, retreat is that place to go. It's like 5 days, 6 days.
Yes, 6 days. And you basically live in the rich rooms of the self all the way through those 6 days. Yeah, there's nothing like it. It's almost impossible to explain the bliss and the sort of sheer happiness that people have when they're on that retreat. They come away. I mean, people talk about the Santa Teresa a lot as being, this land that changes you as well. So I think it has a lot to do with where it is.
Right. It's beautiful. We'll put all of that in the show notes, so go check it out. Thank you so much, Suzanne, again.
Thank you, love. I just love being with you so much. You are just a true soul partner.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel the very same about you.
And I'm so glad you started your podcast again.
Yes, I'm glad too. And what you said about the, me being good at this, just like my critic is like sleeping right now. She's like, you got this.
All the rich rooms are open. So
all the rich rooms are open. Thank you again, Suzanne, and our dear listeners. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you like this conversation, I'd be so grateful if you could leave us a 5-star review. And if you'd like to go deeper into the content we share here, check out our publication/community on Substack, also by the name of Journey Home to Self, where I share newsletter type articles every week on how to discover the true selves within us. Check it out and subscribe to the podcast and the Substack publication. You can find the link in the show notes. Thank you again. We appreciate you so much.